today. Oh, I'm so lightheaded today. Oof. Okay, why is he looking at me? Because that clock isn't right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Worship Matters, session 25. Wow, we've done 25 of these. Now, don't be alarmed. Finale in the title does not mean this is the last one, but this is the close of the topic of the organ. This is part 4 of our talks about the organ. This is the organ in the church. So we're going to look at some practical things. We're going to touch a little bit first on recapping a little bit of the history. And basically, we're going to look at the practicalities of using the organ in the church. The camera is zoomed way out because at one point, I'm going to use 2 hymns where we're going to sing a couple of verses with piano, and then I'm going to shift over and we're going to finish the hymns on the organ. And the reason for that is to thoroughly confuse you. It's to compare, okay, because there's always this thing that goes on. Well, which does this hymn sound really good on, piano or organ? So I kind of want to show that it sounds great on both, but sometimes it depends on what you're trying to create, what mood. Is it a majestic thing that's going on, or is it a quiet meditational, or a florid, very, very lyrical sort of playing style? Or is it a fanfare-ish style that is more majestic? So we're going to look at 2 hymns where I'm going to switch. So first of all, I would like to do a quick recap on some of the history. So if we could have that next slide, please. Oh, no, I lie. I'm going to play you a postlude. So we're going to talk a little bit about things like postludes and preludes on the organ. And this is one based on the Hymn to Joy, which is used in hymns like Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. This is a very, very popular tactic that many composers do, is that they will take hymn tunes. It's very popular in churches, of course. Some churches prefer not to use just anonymous voluntaries, you know. They actually want something that fits into the church. So this is a classical example of it. What do you think? It's amazing the improvisation that they do. I've had a lot of fun arranging hymn tunes myself for the organ. I believe I did play one in the last one for the Easter. And what you do, you can hear key changes, you can hear all sorts of things. It's almost symphonic. You can almost imagine an orchestra playing it, right? It's very creative. What you do is that you take a main motif from the hymn, and then you go with it. You expound a little bit, you play a little bit around with it. You can switch it to a minor key, you can switch it to a different key altogether by modulating into another key. The stuff is endless that you can do with it. And people will identify. They'll say, oh, that was different, but I do know that tune, right? And then it's sort of like, well, yes, it's joyful, joyful, we adore you. And they'll be like, oh, of course it is. But wow, what a grandiose ending that has, right? And of course, I've got it set on the French organ setting because I love my fiery trumpets. Okay, so next up, we're going to look at a little bit of a history, a little bit of recap so that we can remember where the organ came from and how it is used in churches today. So first of all, we need to understand where the organ started. It started in ancient Greek settlements in Egypt, right, in Alexandria. The first builder there was a Greek inventor. This is in BC times, around about 300 BC, where he was playing around with water. Remember the hydrolus, the water organ? That became very popular. It spread throughout the Greek colonies, and then the Romans picked up on it. And that's why it's actually called a hydrolus, I suppose. It sort of sounds Latin, but no, hydro is actually Greek, right? It would have been aqualus, I suppose, if it was translated into Latin. Hydro, aqua, right? The two different classical languages. But at any rate, it found its way into particularly the amphitheaters in the Roman world, right? There were different amphitheaters and colosseums built all over the place, North Africa, throughout Europe, so they're not just in Rome. Very popular because at the time, it was thought to be a very bright, very loud instrument. If you listen to reproductions today, it actually, to our ears, it's not. It's actually very fluty and very gentle. So I suppose to them it was like, wow, this is a powerhouse instrument. Can you imagine doing a time travel thing and bringing them here today to listen to our big cathedral pipe organs? They'd probably pass out, right? Thinking that this gigantic instrument came from a little hydrolus that maybe had 2-octave range at the most, one row of pipes, and here you're pulling out stops from a 90-stop gigantic pipe organ somewhere. They probably would never believe us. So there is a story that the hydrolus was also played in religious celebrations. Now, of course, this is pre-Christian, so for a long time, you need to understand, for a long time, people had that mindset that the hydrolus is a pagan instrument. Okay, so there was a lot of resistance in the early church. You need to understand that the early church started in the Holy Land. A lot of them were originally Jews that were converting over to following the way. Okay, you've got to realize in those days, Christian was not actually used for the movement, for the group of people. It was called followers of the way. Christian, actually, I read, was a derogatory term that the Romans used to describe them when they threw them to the lions, where the hydrolus was also played. So you can see the connections there, right? So you have to understand why the early Christians did not want this instrument in their presence, because it has that connotation. When the Christianity spread throughout the immediate area, you've got to understand that there were ex-pagans that were leaving their religions and coming into the Judeo-Christian faith and converting to the followers of the way. Now, in temple cult, there are oftentimes little orchestras that will play during sacrifices and celebrations to the gods and the goddesses. And so all of them did this. The Romans did it, the Greeks did it. we'll cover that with the choir too. The choir also goes way back to pre-Christian times as well. So when these people are converting, there is a great resistance to they're very cautious with music in the church. They have to make sure that it is of a character and a personality that resembles nothing like what they left, okay? Think of it as leaving, for lack of a better term, a bad marriage. Okay, when you leave, you don't want anything that reminds you of your ex, okay? So it's the same kind of idea. So you can understand where they're coming from when they start bringing harps and flutes and drums and sistrums and things into the synagogues and into the churches. There was a lot of resistance. And when the primal organ started pushing at the front door, people were like, no, we don't want this instrument, because there was that pagan connection. The early Church of Rome, of course, was the first one to say no. Okay, the early church fathers said no. In fact, they wanted no instruments whatsoever in church. That's where we get the plain chants, the Gregorian chants, the Ambrosian chants, and all of those that were totally unaccompanied. However, it didn't take that long. It was in the Middle Ages where the first organ appeared in a Roman Catholic church in France. It was a donation from, I believe, somebody in Turkey who donated it to Charlemagne the Great. And he actually ended up putting it in a cathedral in France. So from there on, it suddenly became very popular. How it was used in that connotation, we're not entirely sure. It may have accompanied some Gregorian chants. Certainly some hymns were also being written. Don't forget, the whole idea of writing hymns expressing personal faith rather than quoting from Scripture was around. Okay, people were using, for example, popular folk tunes and putting Christian words to them, expressing people's faith. So there it started spreading throughout the Holy Roman Empire, absolutely everywhere. Reformation, the 1500s, there was another resistance. Of course, people leaving the Church of Rome wanted their organ, and the reformers said no. Why? Because, okay, by that time the pagan connection was not there anymore. Now it was a papal connection. Okay, they all thought that the organ was a very papist thing, so no, we can't have that. Eventually it did get accepted though, and it made full headway, and it was very popular in Reformed churches too. Some churches resisted it more than others. Martin Luther, not so much. Calvin, he wasn't very fond of it. John Knox was not fond of it either, by the way, folks. The church had its in and outs in the Church of Scotland as well. The church in the organ in the church today is sometimes on shaky ground. I don't think there are too many organ builders today that are commissioned to build brand new organs, except for maybe concert halls or opera houses or town halls. See, where I come from South Africa, there's this British imported tradition of having a city hall. And your city hall was huge, and it was very ornate, and it had an area that could be used for concerts. And it usually had this gigantic, beautiful carved wooden old pipe organ up front. So when I say city halls, I'm not sure if Canadian city halls have them. I think some of them do, especially back east. But certainly places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, I mean, your city hall was your pride and joy. And I remember the gigantic pipe organ in the Johannesburg City Hall when the South African Broadcasting Corporation and their choir used to put on concerts, and you'd hear this organ rumbling and shaking the ground. It was just fantastic. However, maintenance is still a big thing. And I think a lot of today's organ building companies do a lot of maintenance, rebuilding, refurbishing. Things happen. Water damage, strangely enough, is really a big thing. Leaking roofs and stuff like that. Now, the church where I played in Johannesburg one time, I wasn't there, this was way before my time, had a fire in one of the upper halls. Now, this church was very narrow but tall, and it had 2 stories above it of halls and classrooms and offices. And there was a huge hall right above the sanctuary. And at the far end of the hall, where there was a big stage where they would put on plays and things, there was a fire that broke out one year. And the firemen came in there, of course, hosed the whole place down, and all the water fell into the organ case. Almost destroyed an organ that was built in 1901, brought over from Britain. So they had to bring organ builders over to look at it, and there was a South African company too that refurbished and rebuilt the instrument. So water damage really is a big thing. It's expensive. It's expensive to buy. Its initial purchase is phenomenal. When St. John's was looking for a new organ, I did actually ask somebody, how much would a pipe organ cost? And it was a technician that came here from another organ company. We settled for the Rogers. So this was Allen Organs, came in here to look at the church and check the acoustics and all that. And he said, for a smaller pipe organ like to sit up on the balcony like you want, probably about 300,000, 400,000. So it was like, okay, well, that's way beyond our budget. So as you can see, bit shaky ground. Not all congregations can afford it. They can't even afford the maintenance all the time. This one was 40,000 at the time. This model is not produced any longer. It's an older model. There are other bigger models now being, well, different models being produced. But the technology is pretty much the same. Because this one, I selected this because it had a lot of special features that I liked. For its price, to have 3 manuals was really good. The other companies we looked at, some of them we would have paid almost twice that much just for a 2 manual. So I looked at all the things, the stop selections I liked. It was kind of cathedral-y. I really enjoyed the sound. And it can do weird things like change the tuning. So if you play period music, you can change the tuning to that period so that it sounds authentic. If I play Bach, I change it to that time period, to the Baroque period. If I play Renaissance or medieval, I can switch it to that tuning so that it'll sound, yeah, there's a lot of features on there that I love. So 40,000 compared to 250, 300, 400,000. I mean, I'm sure if we had the funds at the time, we probably would have gone for a pipe organ. They would have had to refurbish the balcony, though, to hold it. They're very heavy. So what I'm going to do right now is we're going to sing a hymn together. It is a Genevan psalm. So I'm going to change the tuning to a Renaissance tuning so you could hear how it would sound when we worship together. And yeah, just something authentic. So since we were looking at history, let's do a historical hymn. Now you've got to understand, this was written in 1551. Okay, so this is right at the height of the Reformation and John Calvin starting his movement in Switzerland and spreading to France and all that. So today's tuning is called equal temperament. Back in those days, it was mean tone. So you're going to hear how very different it sounds. Now Israel may say then that in truth, if that the Lord had not our right maintained, if that the Lord had not with us remained, when cruel foes against us rose to strive, we surely had been swallowed up alive. when their wrath against us fiercely rose. The swelling tide had o'er us spread its wave. The raging stream had then become our grave. The surging flood in proudly swelling roll most surely then had overwhelmed our soul. Blessed be the Lord, who made us not their prey, as from the snare a bird escapeth free. Their net is rent, and so escaped we are we. Our only help is in God's holy name, who made the earth and all the heavenly frame. Amen. Now, before I get too excited, I need to tune it back, otherwise I will forget. And then everything will sound weird. So, of course, Psalms always have to end with an amen, right? Right? That's one of the things that is falling away in churches these days, unfortunately, are the amens, and I love them. Especially the Psalms, I like to keep it there. Okay, let's look at the architecture and the art. So, selecting the organ company, there are thousands out there. Thousands all around the world, including Canada. Canada has quite a few. We have really, really popular builders right here in BC. One of them is in Chilliwack. Jan Hans Koppeljan builds beautiful pipe organs. In fact, folks, if you get a chance and you want to hear one of his prime organs, go to the Church of the Good Shepherd, the Roman Catholic Church, just up here in Surrey, South Surrey. It's a big round building, very unusual building. The sanctuary sort of gathers around the stage. The organist is sort of in a pit off to the side, and the pipes are all up front. It is a gorgeous organ. I have played it. Absolutely beautiful. I could not believe my ears. And then when I saw the tab, the label on the console of who the builder is, and of course there's an opus number, blah, 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 because they keep track of all the numbers of organs they build. I was stunned. I thought it was an old Cassavant from Montreal, from Quebec. It had that rich, romantic, very beautiful sound. So do yourself a favor, if there's ever an organ concert or anything at Church of the Good Shepherd, you really have to go and hear it. Beautiful. So yes, there are several companies. Cassavant, of course, is Canada's premier #1. There's also Les Tourneaux, also in Quebec. There are several. It seems that French influence in the Quebec province and Montreal and Quebec seem to have really fostered the tradition of organ building, and a lot of the traditions came over from France. Cassavant, of course, was following the Romantic 19th century French traditions, and then started expanding a little bit into the English Romantic style. And nowadays, they build a whole conglomerate of different styles, including classical. Some of them sound very German, North German Baroque style too. So they've really expanded quite a lot, and they built pipe organs throughout the world. Very popular. So one of the things that a church needs to think about is the cost, because not all builders will have the same quote. Let's say St. John's was going to buy a 20-stop pipe organ up there on the balcony, and we We send out tenders to 5 or 6 different companies. It'll be amazing the difference in cost and what is expected. So that is something churches do need to think about, is sending out as many tenders as possible. Down south in the States to hundreds of organ builders down there. And there are many imported from Britain too, pipe organs here in Canada, including American organs. Specification, size, and of course cost, like I mentioned. Specification refers to the list of the stops and everything the organ can do. So you have to remember, whenever you add another stop, that's a whole row of pipes. So that's 61 pipes. They are all made by hand, one by one. Okay, so for every one of these stop tabs that's on the manual, that's 61 pipes in a row. It costs a lot of money. It's 32, I believe 32 pipes for pedals, and they are enormous. They can get up to 16 feet. This one has a 32-foot stop, and they actually are 32-foot a lot of the time in big cathedral organs. So you can think the thing is probably this wide and 32 feet up. That had to be made by hand. Okay, so cost is a really, really big thing. How big an organ are you going to have? You've got to understand that this can take up to a year, sometimes 2, to finalize it and create this organ for you. Usually your music director or some musicologist will be called in. And, what kind of organ, what stops are we looking for? What sound are we looking for in this church, in the sanctuary? What will the organ predominantly be used for? Are you going to do concerts? Well, okay, you want to make sure you have some concerty stops. Is it just going to be for accompanying singing? You're going to focus on certain stops alone? So, yeah, there's a lot of things that usually you'll have a board. Churches will pull a board together, a selection board, anywhere from 5 to 12 people, and they will all question these things. Your music director, organist will be involved too, sometimes even the pastor. Requirements within the space. Okay, so a space like this, the building is predominantly wood, which tends to suck up a lot of sound. So there's very little reverberation in here. St. John's is typical of what they call a church that fosters clear speech, because there's no echo, so your words don't get muddled when you talk. So it's a church that is focused on preaching, so that no muddled sounds will happen. However, it has been said for musical production, you want a little bit of a reverb. You know what's really sweet, guys? This one has its own built-in reverberation. So it will sound as if though it's in a large building made out of stone and marble and mortar and bricks and whatever, and it'll create its own slight echo and reverb, which I absolutely love. Otherwise, it would be really kind of dry. So that all goes into what kind of organ would you have in here? Well, it's a big building, but it's very compact also. So with the balconies and everything, you're kind of on top of each other. Think of an apartment building versus acreages. So, space is at a premium here. You don't want an instrument that's going to scream in your ears. You want something that's warmer, gentler, speaks better on a lower wind pressure than a high. Like you would never have a romantic style British or French organ in here. It would just, they would hear it down to the whale wall. It would be so loud, okay? The people over here next door will definitely be complaining. As it is, this instrument you can hear out in the parking lot. And you can hear it out front too, even on the sidewalk. If someone else is practicing in here, I can hear it. So I hope they like what they hear, because we haven't had any complaints yet. So specification, how big is it? What's it going to be used for? The space within the confines, how the organist is going to be used. All factor comes into play there. Things like the organist. Okay. What is the organist's training experience? The specialization. Okay. These are all things that factor into how the organ is used in the church, not just the cost, the building and all that, but when you are selecting your organist for your church, these things do come into play, right? So that's why we have a selection board that will interview and talk to several candidates. Interviews will be set up, auditions will be set up. Every church I've played for, there's always been an audition where they will say, okay, we'll select 2 surprise hymns, and you select 2 hymns. And usually they want at least one of them to be classical and one to be contemporary, because they want to hear how proficient you are at the piano too. Can be a little nerve-wracking, because you have this council of owls kind of sitting there frowning at you. And hopefully after you've played, you see this. And not, where did we get this person? Yeah, so it can be a little nerve-wracking. You sit at the organ, you kind of shake a little bit, and your lower lip sort of shivers. But it's all important to make sure that you get the correct candidate for your church to play that instrument properly. Right. The organ used in church as accompanying singers is, of course, the number one reason that you have the thing in your building to begin with. Okay, yes, preludes, postludes, concert pieces, recitals, yes, that all figures into, but that's not the principal reason for having it there. Okay, concert halls, city halls, all of that, opera house, whatever, for doing concerts, organs are usually designed and around that whole concept of concerts and recitals and whatever. But organ in church, number one, it has to accompany singers and it has to do so properly. We'll be playing around with certain little things in a little bit so that we can see, does this sound good for accompanying? Does it not? Does it carry through? Can the people actually hear the melody and the tune? Because you've got to understand, if they don't know the hymn, your organ has to carry that tune clearly so they can hear it. Okay, and I've had some challenges. This is where experience comes in. And I have had challenges where people have said to me, you know what, Rain, we're sorry, hon, but we couldn't figure out the melody. You know, you were just so creative and going all over the place, but really you should have played it straightforward, clearly, because we don't know the hymn. And it's like, sorry guys, I had no idea. Just because I know it doesn't mean everybody else does, right? So we have to be sensitive as organists too and understand that not everybody knows some hymns. Training, experience, specialization. Accompanying singers, the congregation, of course, top of the list. Let's face it, you can't find too many other instruments that carries the same power and the same ability to make untrained people sitting in the pews sound like $1 million. Okay? How many times have I heard people say, oh, I can't sing a note, I am so bad. But oh my goodness, when you start playing those hymns, I feel like I'm part of the heavenly choirs around the throne. And you know what? That really brings a shiver down us organists' backs, because we're doing what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to encourage you to sing and make you sound like you're a totally proficient, professional singer. And you know, it's amazing. Sitting up here, I can listen to people. I'm like, yep, they sound really good. Yeah, okay, this is working. Okay, so congregational singing, it has a power. The piano is great. I'm not dissing other instruments, not by a long shot. The piano's forte is that it is a percussive instrument. There's a hammer hitting a string. So sometimes the organ has been described, it can be fluffy or woolly, which means clear attacking of notes can be a challenge. And there are certain instances where the organ can sound kind of fluffy sometimes, particularly when you use a lot of soft or lower pitched stops. I would never use that if the hymn is not well known. I might be, if it's a gentle hymn or a sad or a meditative hymn, I might use something a little louder. Okay, it's a little louder. If I want it even clearer, I would add some higher pitched stops just to add more brilliance. And if it's really well known, I would just go absolutely berserk. And get really creative. Now, the funny thing is I actually had a voice student for a little while, a lady from Hong Kong, very sweet, love her to pieces. And she said that when I accompany the old Anglican hymns at the second service on Sundays, she sometimes can't hear the melody. And it's because the congregation knows the hymns inside out. Our priest sings his heart out. I have my best buddy Kelly up here singing her heart out. I'm singing my heart out. So I just go berserk on the organ and I improvise while I'm accompanying. Okay, improvising hymns can be tricky. If your congregation does not know them, don't improvise. Keep straightforward, make sure they can hear the melody clearly. Because when you start doing a Liberace thing on the organ and they don't know the hymn, oh, you know what, it just falls to pieces. It's like opening the oven too quickly on that fluffy souffle. Down she goes. Accompanying choir. Now, this is a real skill, and people don't realize it. Because there are times where a choir will sing a big piece and you want to create a big sound, but you can't use the same big sounds that you're using when you're accompanying the congregation, or you just will not hear that choir. That is why in larger pipe organs, you have a third lower manual called choir. And very oftentimes, it's majestic. There are a few powerful stops in there, but they are not voiced as heavily as the great. Okay, so they're a little gentler. Because if you think in a big church, a congregation of, let's just say around about 300, you've got to make this thing lead them. So you've got to have a lot of booming power, a lot of support there. Okay, you're going to have a lot of singers going, I hope my neighbor can't hear me. Hey, the pipe organ will drown you out, don't worry about it. Just sing your little hearts out, for goodness sake, you know. But with the choir, it's different. The people have to hear the words clearly. The people want to hear the parts. If you have a choir singing in vocal parts, you can't just hear soprano and, I sort of hear the altos. The tenors kind of got lost there. You've got to hear them all clearly. So accompanying a choir really is a big skill. And it takes a long time to get it right sometimes. And you will upset a lot of choir members along the way. Trust me, I have. It's sort of like, Rain, I can't even hear myself, much less even my neighbor. Listening is very important in singing in a choir. We're going to start a new session where I'm talking about the choir soon, in our next session actually. So we're going to do things like that, listening, matching, tone, blending in, all that kind of skill. So your organist has to be very sensitive to all of these things. So, soloist. I love accompanying soloists. It is so much fun. You have to bring the organ quite down because now you're dealing with one singer. You may be dealing with a duet or a trio as well, but they're all soloists. So this is not a choir. This is even gentler still. But I once used to accompany a retired opera singer quite often, and she was a delight. She really was. And she said, Reinhard, you bathe me. The words she used were so beautiful. You bathe me in this warmth of this rich orchestral type sound. I can hear violins and occasionally a clarinet solo or an oboe, and I'm just surrounded by this warm orchestral sound. And I think that was a real feather in my cap for me. I was like, yes, thank you, Gloria. So it was really quite a compliment for her. Soloists, yeah, it can be quite a handful. And trust me, if you don't get it right, some of them will really let you know. They can be quite vocal, especially the retired opera singers, because what better of a soloist could you possibly have than a dame something or other singing there? So don't drown them out, right? But it's a fantastic experience learning how to deal with all these different requirements and demands of an organist and the organ. So all of these things have to go into consideration when you are selecting your organ and your organist who's going to play for you. So all of these things have to figure into your search committee, into your interviews, into your everything. Because quite oftentimes you'll be asked to work with the choir as part of your selection process as well. They want to see and hear how you handle the choir too. I've been through that as well. And you have all these strange people standing there and they're all looking at you saying, okay, what can we get from, what's going to happen? What does this guy know? You know, it's like, okay, folks, we're going to do some warm-ups. And then they're like, oh, okay, we've never done that before. So it can be quite nerve-wracking, but it can be exciting too. Accompanying other instruments. Now, this is something that people oftentimes don't think about when it comes to things like your organ. What is it good for? What is it not good for? What are you selecting it for? Piano organ duets, we do quite oftentimes with my friend Christine. We do a lot of piano organ duets. Do they work together? Yes, they do. If you go online and you look at repertoire for piano and organ, it is absolutely enormous, especially for church. There's also a lot of concert pieces that have been arranged for the two instruments. From my experience, in the whole 31 years of being an organist and a music director in church, I honestly have to say that the flute is gorgeous with the organ, because they're both of the same family of sound. They're both fluty type woodwindy instruments. However, the organ can sound like stringed instruments, which gives a beautiful enveloping sort of orchestral sound to accompany flute. Is really beautiful. Trumpet is out of this world. Trumpet and organ. There you can open up the organ a little bit more, make it a bit fuller, because the trumpet is that kind of instrument. I have accompanied trumpeters before. I have accompanied other woodwind players, oboe, clarinet. They're a little brighter than the flute, so I can open her up a little bit more, but don't drown it out, right? It's still woodwind. I have accompanied string players. I've accompanied violinist and viola. Again, you don't want to drown them out, but you can make it a little more powerful. Real rich orchestral sounds with those. Harp and organ is pure magic, because I play the harp as well. And harp and organ together just creates this incredibly ethereal, mystical sound. So if you think along those lines, change your stops to create a beautiful backdrop for the harp. You don't want to drown it out. The harp has certain little timbres and tones that are unique to the instrument. You don't want to smother them. So stick to that warm, gentle background orchestral type sound. It's a real challenge, and it takes experience. It takes making mistakes. It takes trying out different things. But it really is well worth it, and I thoroughly enjoy playing with other instrumentalists too. Carry on with architecture and art. Okay, organ music, repertoire. These are things that organists need to build up over time. Okay, it doesn't all just land in your lap magically overnight. There are many resources. There are publishers out there galore that publish music. Some of it is really, really cheap, especially if they're reproducing older pieces. So I have a library like you can't believe that I've accumulated over the years. People have given me pieces too. Oh, this belonged to my grandma, she used to play in church too, but none of us play the instrument, so do you want it? Oh, yes, I do. So I have a massive library. There are other resources on the internet that actually have copyright cleared, very old publications that have been scanned that you can download and print yourself for free. And that, to me, is a real boon. It's a pity I didn't actually bring one of my 3-ring binders with me that I have filled up with music from websites like this, and they are real treasures. Music by Bach, music by the 18th century composers, the 19th century composers. In fact, most of the early organ pieces, actually all of them, that I played when we were doing the history of the organ, those bizarre old medieval pieces, that came off the internet. So that really is a great resource to look into. So postludes, preludes, voluntaries, concert pieces, you can find all of these. What do they mean? What is the meaning of these words? Prelude, of course, is generally a gentler, softer piece that is played before the service. You don't want to smother the people and drown them out or deafen them as they come in. Some church traditions have a silence, or at least a moment of silence when people come in, and they're supposed to enter the sanctuary in silence, sit down and pray. When I was a little boy, I think I mentioned this before, in the big old Dutch Reform church that my Oma and Opa back in South Africa used to take me to. You come in, the moment you enter the sanctuary, it's a holy space. Okay, if you want to chit-chat and laugh and carry on, you go out and do that. When you come in, you sit down, you pray. And there are many churches that still do that today. And then after a little moment of silence, the organist will come and play something gentle and meditative. Ideally, it should be something that has to do with the faith. Doesn't always have to be. It can be a classical piece that has been arranged, like Air on a G String by Bach. It's very gentle. It doesn't overwhelm anybody. It'll keep you in that meditative, quiet state. Postludes, of course, are usually the exact opposite. They are full-blown, full blast, pull out all the stops, including all the trumpets and tubas and trombas, make as big a sound as you can, and quite often they are in a march style. Again, they may sometimes use a theme from a hymn. Okay, so things like Joyful, Joyful, which we just heard, the hymn to joy, would actually be better as a postlude than a prelude. Depends on the service, though. It really does. If you have a big celebratory service like Easter Sunday, you probably might want to have something more fanfarish and more celebratory. So not all preludes need to be soft. Voluntaries is a very, very catch-all term. And it came from Britain originally. Voluntaries were very popular in the 1700s. They could have been used for church or secular. They didn't necessarily carry a religious theme or an idea or anything. They were sort of like orchestral, classical miniatures. It could have been a march, it could have been a dance, it could have been a waltz, a minuet, or something. So they were very, very general. Some music schools, universities that are training new organists and things say steer clear of them. If you're going to be a church organist, play church music or proper classical repertoire. But I do find some voluntaries very, very gorgeous. Concert pieces, of course, come to play. Now, you won't always hear big concert pieces in a church service, but sometimes you will. Occasionally here as a postlude, I have played concert pieces. I have played toccatas. I have played bigger pieces on rare occasions here, because they're long and they're difficult and you need to spend a lot of time practicing. So you can't always do it each and every Sunday, but certainly for special occasions it does work very well. Practical applications of the organ. Oh no, the organ as artwork. Oh, this one is a yummy one. As we saw in the last one with all the photos of all those different organs, does a design fit your sanctuary? That's a very important consideration. Okay, you don't always want a very classical sanctuary that looks like a medieval Gothic cathedral and have this ultra-modern looking caseless pipe organ, although sometimes you will actually find that. Or you don't want a very modern sanctuary that necessarily has this very Baroque, highly carved thing with angels and cherubs everywhere, you know. So as artwork, you kind of want to stick to the theme of your building. This sanctuary to me is modern, but it is wood. I personally would go for a more modern wood-encased organ that kind of has sort of a Dutch Baroque or German Baroque appeal to it. Clean, simple, not too florid, but you can have a little bit of embellishment here and there. You can have a little swirl or something. But certainly I wouldn't go berserk and have a total Baroque, big cathedral type look. I mean, it just would be totally out of place. So some little things that we can look at. And those are things that organ builders will bring to your search committee, to the church, to whomever. What design are you looking for? What works for you? And they'll draw up blue plans and all sorts of things like that. Okay, let's have a look at practical applications of the organ. Creative registration, particularly with well-known hymns like these two. Okay, so we're looking at things like Rejoice the Lord is King. Generally, most classical traditional congregations know this hymn. Rejoice the Lord is King. Dee, 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 dee. Your younger generations may not always know them, or they may go, I remember that from Grandma's church. But they don't sing it at my big Hillsong church. But yeah, I have heard it. So you can play around a little bit with a familiar hymn, and that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to improvise here and there. I made a mistake. I was going to play this one at the piano too, but I'm not going to. I'm going to do Shine, Jesus, Shine with piano and organ to see which one. It's a contemporary hymn, a more modern hymn. It came from the Baptist background. So, you could almost hear them clapping and dancing in the aisles, right? Like, shine, Jesus, shine, right? But it can sound really impressive on the organ too, by the way. So I will do Shine, Jesus, Shine on both. But right now, let's have a look at Rejoice, the Lord is King. And listen carefully to what I do. Okay, sometimes I'll play straightforward, particularly at the very beginning. And then as I feel the congregation is comfortable, I'll fool around and do all sorts of interesting things. Now you have to understand, you must know the piece inside out. You must be very familiar with the chord progressions, with how the hymn goes in order to do these things. Because if you do not, oh boy, you can really make a hash, let me tell you. Done that too. Rejoice, the Lord is King, your sovereign Lord adore. Give thanks, O mortals, sing and triumph evermore. Lift up your heart, lift up your voice, rejoice again, I say, rejoice. For Christ the Savior reigns, the God of truth and love. When Jesus purged our stains, he took his seat above. Lift up your heart, lift up your voice, rejoice again, I say, rejoice. His reign can never fade, he rules o'er earth and heaven. The keys of death and hell are to our Savior give. Lift up your heart, lift up your voice, rejoice again, I say, rejoice. He sits at God's right hand, till all his foes submit. and bow to his command and fall beneath his feet. Lift up your heart, lift up your voice, rejoice again, I say rejoice. Rejoice in glorious hope, for Christ the Judge shall come, and take the faithful up to their eternal home. We soon shall hear the archangel's voice, the trump of God shall sound, rejoice. So as you can hear there, you have to know the hymn to get away with things like runs. So if you're going to do things like if you're going to improv and get away with that, you have to really know the hymn, and you have to make sure that your singers know the hymn. Even better if you have a trained choir that has rehearsed it and has the power to help lead the singing if the hymn might not be very well known. But you really don't want to lose your people by going absolutely berserk. And how did you like the chimes in the beginning, right? Little things like that. Creative registration makes it interesting. So as a Christian myself, I understand that hymns are sung to praise God, not ourselves, and I certainly don't want to be worshipped. So I don't want to be an idol. However, making it a memorable experience that just makes people's hearts flutter and say, oh, I feel like I'm in the courts of heaven, is important, right? I do believe in beauty in worship and making it a wonderful experience for the people too. God can use us professionally trained individuals who might have PhDs and things all behind our names too. So bringing art, creativity, and all of that together with spirituality, to me, is a very powerful thing. And trust me, folks, I get shivers up and down my back too. When I'm creating music like this, I do feel that God is working through me as well. So it is a very powerful experience for me as well. I'll sometimes get tears in my eyes if it's beautiful too. Make no mistake. I get shivers, I get excited, and, we experience that as well. So let's look at Shine, Jesus, Shine. Lord, the light of your love is shining. What I'm going to do is I will do the first two. It's only 3 verses. So the first 2 I will do here. So bear with me because I need a couple of seconds to shift over to here when we do the final verse. And just listen what you think. Now, they're both beautiful. They both have their own special pros and cons, right? Depends on what kind of sound or feeling you're trying to encourage. Lord, the light of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with and let there be light. Lord, I come to your awesome presence, from the shadows into your radiance. By your blood I may enter your brightness. Search me, try me, consume all my darkness. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. Now let's listen to this final verse. As we gaze on your kingly brightness, so our faces display your likeness, ever changing from glory to glory. Mirrored here, may our lives tell your story. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word. Let our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. Very different. Both are very beautiful, but it's a whole different feel, right? The one kind of feels like it's by pop stars, maybe. Oh, I see some people saying, I prefer that one. So it all depends on the kind of service. If it is a more upbeat contemporary style, this one could make people go, oh, wow, wow, a praise and worship song on the organ. Well, what a novel idea. And others might be like, oh, it sounds like great-grandmother's church way back in Nurendorf or something, you know. So it all depends on the feel. With the organ, of course, it sounds like it was performed at Westminster Abbey or something, right? Which is a possibility. I've heard some beautiful modern hymns being performed in English cathedrals with the boys and men's choir, everything, in their robes. I've heard Make Me a Channel of Your Peace sung in a big cathedral in Britain, and it sounded absolutely gorgeous. I've heard all sorts of fascinating things, actually, you know, being done on the pipe organ in these big cathedrals, so it is possible. I'm going to close off with a piece by, I believe he's a Danish composer. This is a typical postlude. It doesn't carry a religious theme, but it does have a grandeur, and it is really a nice piece to send people out with. Postlude in C, how original. Sometimes they will just simply call it postlude in C, prelude in B flat or whatever. Okay, they won't always give it a fancy full name. What's interesting is the flowing in and out of tones and different volumes and powers in this piece. And all the people marched out all happy and cheerful. And see, something like that for a very celebratory, upbeat, uplifting sort of service, you can't beat it. Okay, our next one, we're going to start looking at the choir. And this should be an eye-opener, very fascinating subject, dealing with choirs in church. What does it all entail? What happens in choir? 99.99999% of people who go to church have no idea of what a choir really is, what it takes to be in one, what it takes to lead one, and even little things like training the singers, all these little things, even things like walking down the aisle can take training, can take exercise and practice too, believe it or not, folks. Wow, walking down in the aisle, especially in time. So we will be looking at that. I'm not going to do one on the 5th of May because next week I have the concert with Christine, and then immediately after that I have to prepare for another big Worship Matters because it's going to take a lot of research and stuff. So I'm going to skip to the 12th of May, Thursday at 11, and we're going to look at the history of the choir first. We're going to look at the pre-Christian era and then going into early Christianity and so on and so forth, into the Renaissance, into the Baroque, kind of follow the same pattern as the organ. And that will be our session 26. So thank you so much for being here today, and please mark that on your calendars. You don't want to miss this. This is going to be great. Okay, have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye. You're so welcome.